Peace and blessings to you. My name is Jere B. I am the EntreMusician, and so are you. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2020. Boy, do I have an interview for you and you and you. None other than the iconic Mr. Hines, music director and producer of the three-time Grammy-winning explosion we all know as Sounds of Blackness. We're going to talk about all things EntreMusicians, how he has done it, how Sounds of Blackness has maintained their legacy through so many years and more. But first, we got to do this. As you know, all of our podcasts, our channels, our websites are sponsored by the wonderful people at Vocal. Vocal is the only beverage on the planet which is designed to soothe, refresh, and restore your voice. If you talk all day like I sometimes do, or you sing all night like the members of Sounds of Blackness, you got to get yourself some Vocal. Go to drinkvocal.com to learn more. Man, am I blessed and highly favored to have this gentleman sitting here to my left, Mr. Hines. Many blessings to you, sir.
The blessing is all mine, my brother. Thank you so much on behalf of your brothers and sisters, the Sounds of Black.
Man, oh boy. I got to tell you, I have been a fan of Sounds of Blackness since its inception, or until I did a little bit more research. I was only 4 years old. But you guys have done extraordinary things. Let me give just a little bit more context for people who do not know of your history. I mean, obviously, your band, Sounds of Blackness, this project has performed and toured with Quincy Jones, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and Prince and Usher, Stevie, Michael, Aretha, Elton John, Johnny Gill, Patti, LaBelle, Dolly Parton, and on and on and on. You've performed nationally, internationally, and like I said, 3 Grammy Awards winning, done countless workshops. You are what we call the ultimate EntreMusician. My God, brother.
Bless you, brother.
So let me ask this question. I want to begin this from the end. Okay, so we're going to switch.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, how would you like, with all of the accolades and accomplishments of Sounds of Blackness, how would you like your music to be remembered?
As embodying the music of a culture and a people. We say as Sounds of Blackness, and we have said from day one, Brother Jere B, that Sounds of Blackness brings the music of the African-American experience to people of all backgrounds with messages of inspiration. And so we seek to glorify God through by uplifting people through African-American music. So, and we had to try to reduce it to one sound bite or sentence. That's it, to glorify God by uplifting people through Black music.
Man, you have absolutely done it. And let me ask you this: in your quest and on this journey, this great journey of Sounds of Blackness, what is the most important lesson that you would give a new artist who is starting out today?
I would say to be true to your craft, be true to yourself. You know, the industry, there's a lot of great things about the industry. There's some not so great things about the music industry. One of the not so great things is a tendency to mold and shape you to something other than what you actually are. You know, it's just in the makeup of the industry, and I think even in the history and the legacy of the industry, to try to do that with artists and to shape whatever the current mold is, kind of thing, as opposed to what they really are. So in the words of the old adage, to thine own self be true.
Absolutely. Now, is this the same lesson you learned? And if so, at what point in the career did you begin to learn this lesson that is the first point of advice you'd give to a new artist?
Well, I pass that on from my beloved longtime brothers and friends, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Our interaction and friendship, Brother Jere, really goes way beyond our recording. Our families go back. I'm a native of Yonkers, New York, so shout out to the East Coast. But I say that to say, ever since our family moved to Minneapolis here from Yonkers, just one of the first families that we interacted with were, the families of Jam and Lewis. Both of their families had musicians, and of course, my mom, the late great Doris Hines, was a great jazz singer. So there's a lot of way back history with that. But I
Wow.
say that to say this, in terms of what you asked me. When Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis signed Sounds of Blackness as the first artist to their Perspective Records label, and that was such and still is such an honor for us. The first
Absolutely.
thing they said was, "Doc," that's their nickname for me, said, "Doc, don't change. We want to present you to the world just the way you are." And they knew who and what Sounds of Blackness was, again, because we go back to the 70s, brother. I'll just put it out there.
Yeah.
Back before the time was the time, it was known as Flight Time, which of course is the name of their publishing company.
Right.
And Sounds of Blackness and Flight Time would perform many times together here in Minneapolis. So we knew each other's music. They're familiar. So when they said, "Don't change," they knew what they were talking about. They knew who they had signed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's absolutely excellent. Can you go a little bit more into the history of Sounds of Blackness? I believe the project started in 1969, actually, right?
Yes, yes, yes. The foundation for Sounds of Blackness began in 1969 at my alma mater, McAllister College. A shout out to McAllister here in the Twin Cities. And our emeritus founder, shout out to Brother Russell Knighton, a native of Beaumont, Texas. What happened very quickly, brother, is McAllister College, a predominantly white, private college here in the Twin Cities, in the late 60s embarked on a very ambitious program to recruit students of color, and that was
Mhm.
called EEOC, Expanded Educational Opportunities. And they were very successful with that. At one time, on a campus of about 1,500, there were almost 200 Black students. And one of the offshoots of that was that the students organized a number of groups on their own. There was a theater group called Black Arts Midwest, which still exists. There was a political group called BLAC, the Black Liberation Affairs Committee, which also still exists. And there was this 50-voice choir called the McAllister Black Voices, under the direction, as I say, of Brother Russell Knighton. Fast forward to January of 1971, their musician transferred to another school, and they asked yours truly to come on as director. And I was honored to do that because even back then they were very excellent, singing freedom songs and some spirituals and gospel and all that, the consciousness music of the time, to be young,
Yeah.
gifted, and black, and all of that.
Yeah.
But the vision that the good Lord gave me, brother, with this excellent ensemble, was to carry on the tradition of people like Duke Ellington. Now we hear the name Duke Ellington and we think of jazz, and we should. But Duke Ellington would be the first to say, "I do the music of my people." So many don't know that Duke recorded and composed and performed spirituals, gospel. He did 4 sacred recordings, blues. So he did the music of the culture. And so that's the vision that the good Lord gave me for this ensemble. And that was the reason for and the meaning of the name Sounds of Blackness. Every sound of the Black experience: jazz, blues, hip hop, rock, R&B, spirituals, reggae, ragtime, gospel. All of those are the sounds of Blackness. And that's who we were then, and that's who we are now.
You said it so well. I mean, because the beautiful thing about keeping your culture, the beautiful thing about maintaining your integrity and the truth of who you are is once you are centered in that, it becomes universal to all, because the
Yes.
sounds of Blackness being the core, it didn't remain in the Black experience, or even though your fan base primarily was foundationally Black, you've worked with Dolly Parton, you've
Yes.
worked with Sting. Tell me about some of those experiences and how they've grown to appreciate the legacy of the Sounds of Blackness.
It just absolutely amazing, especially those 2 artists that you mentioned and others as well, especially from the country genre, Lyle Lovett, Vince Gill, it goes on. And you know what? It comes down to what the great Stevie Wonder said, and that music is the universal language.
It is.
And those, the people that you mentioned, brother, are just consummate artists. They're musicians, and so they get it in terms of the universality of music and the universal language. And they knew what Sounds of Blackness were about. Many of your listeners may or may not know Dolly Parton is an amazing songwriter, as well as performer, musician, singer, actress, all those kind of things. So of course, she wrote, and I Will Always Love You. And okay, so people know that's a huge hit.
Yeah.
And she had written a song for Sounds of Blackness as well, and we've been blessed to perform with her on a couple of occasions as well. You mentioned Sting. Sting came here when he was working on the soundtrack for the movie Demolition Man, and he was working on the title track and recorded it here at Paisley Park with our longtime friend Prince, and we have to talk about him.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
But we were out at Paisley, and he called on Sounds of Blackness, to lend the vocals to that title track Demolition Man, and because they knew again what we were about, and it was just artist to artist, and what comes from the heart reaches the heart.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely. Yes. How do you maintain such a perfect balance of all of the genres that you blend into a Sound of Blackness groove? How do you do that? That's beautiful. Quincy Jones probably comes very close. Stevie, of course, but just to have the multi-cultural genre that you have, the approach, how do you maintain that balance?
Oh, bless you. Thank you, brother. I appreciate all the love, man, and what you just said. Well, by the grace of God and by the guidance of His Spirit, first and foremost, and the legacy of the ancestors really guides that as well. It's in the culture, just starting with the motherland, Africa, that birthed all of this.
Yes.
This music and of course our culture kind of thing, but keeping that foundation and that perspective, speaking of perspective, with our music and with our culture, and that knowing that even I talk to my younger brothers in terms of hip hop, and our take on it is of course a current take, and and going all the way back, to New York and all that kind of thing. But the whole idiom of word and rhyme to rhythm and drum is actually eons old. That goes back to the motherland. So it's all there. So we keep that perspective to answer your question, my brother, that
yes.
We are an African people. You can take the African out of Africa, but you can't take the Africa out of the African. And so, so the rhythm of the drum and the polyrhythms and syncopations and blue tonalities of Africa still were never lost, even throughout the transatlantic slave trade. One of the great stories in history. Not only was it not lost, but we persevered with it and actually succeeded with it as a survival mechanism. So with that perspective, you have to give balance to all the music. I tell some of my gospel people some of the time that some of whom have a problem with the blues or hip hop or R&B. I tell them, you know what? You cannot appreciate the glory, hallelujah of the gospel without the pain of the blues. Sure. And without the history and complexity of the spirituals and the work songs, because they're all part of the same family.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll just say it right here. I think that you, Mr. Hines, as well as the Sounds of Blackness, I do believe in my heart because I was raised in the church, church drummer from, little guy. But I do believe that you and Sounds of Blackness are the answer to what Walter Hawkins, Andre, James Cleveland were trying to do, but it was too taboo back then. Right. And I think, you couldn't really roll with that. There were some times, and I'm here in Northeast Ohio, in this area before 1973, 1974, it was even taboo to have drums in the church.
How about that?
You know what I mean? And so the bass and, bringing those contemporary rhythms, and you saw Walter Hawkins, you saw James Cleveland pushing that ever more and more until we got the Fred Hammonds and the Commissioned and the Winans and whatnot.
Right.
But you said something too that I want to kind of look at, because you mentioned the hip hop, which, I agree, the rhythm of the drum, but Sounds of Blackness in your most iconic time, or when you were at your most popular, hip hop was kind of the antithesis of what Black life should be. And so your music being encouraging, uplifting the human spirit, we were seeing a lot of things going on in hip hop,
right?
Anti-Black pro-life, if you understand what I'm trying to say. I do feel that music is spirit, And so could you dig in a little deeper on that? Because all of your songs were uplifting. We're uplifting the spirit. We're encouraging. We're making sure that if someone was depressed, hey, don't worry about that. Be optimistic. Be encouraged.
Yes,
Can you speak to that a little bit?
absolutely. And at the time that, as you mentioned, allude to, my brother, there was so much negativity on the airwaves, and so many people tell us that optimistic was literally like a breath of fresh air, in terms of some positivity and motivation and inspiration, for the people and for all people, really. And that was very deliberate. But we always have reached out to our brothers and sisters and worked with them in the hip hop community. We've been blessed to collaborate with Salt and Pepper. Shout out to them, and Spinderella. We didn't forget you, baby.
Right.
Oh yeah. We recorded with and performed with them with Craig Mack, which surprised a lot of people, because Craig. Right, with Spirit, because as you know, Craig, rest his soul. We just lost him a couple of years ago. But Craig at the time was coming pretty hard, and I know you remember.
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
People weren't so much surprised at Sounds of Blackness, doing a hip hop or track with hip hop artists. But with Craig Mack, they said, man, he's straight up street. It's like, yeah, but no, that's what it's all about. Scripture says to go into the highways and hedges.
That's
so
right.
it's about the street.
That's right, and that's beautiful. I knew we had to get together. I knew it.
Oh yeah. You already know.
That's absolutely on point. So when we talk about balance too, from the standpoint of being this producer, this EntreMusician, what about the balance of working with so many different personalities within the Sounds of Blackness? How do you navigate that?
Well, again, I got a serious answer for you and then a funny answer for you. The serious answer first is only by the grace of God and by the dedication of a lot of great singers and musicians. And I'm glad you referred to us as a band, because so often people just refer to our vocalists, but all that instrumentation you hear on the record, that's not hired help. That's Sounds of Blackness band. We have a 10-piece orchestra and always have had, horns and all. Now that's the serious answer. The funny answer is this. Speaking of people who we lost, just some years ago, the late great Roger Troutman. Everybody knows Zap.
Absolutely.
And everybody knows Zap was a really big band.
Right.
Okay, they had like 12, 15, whatever you say. So Roger had something in common with Prince. He would call at 2 or 3 in the morning like it was the middle of the day. And Roger would always say your whole name. Say, Gary Hines, I got a groove for Sounds of Blackness. All just real outgoing thing. Just call up 2, 3. Might be right. Gary Hines, I've been thinking about this. So one morning he called, 2 or 3 in the morning, and said, "Oh Lord, here we go." And he calls me up. Now think about the question you asked me about in terms of dealing with so many people, right? So he says, Gary Hines. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Brother, I'm all right." He said, "I want you to know, Gary Hines, that I've been praying extra hard for you." I said, "Well, brother, thank you, but why is that?" He said, "Because I know what it's like to be in charge of a bunch of Negroes." I hollered at my apartment at 3 in the morning. I'm sure my neighbors thought I was crazy, but anyways. So.
I can dig it.
But that's a true story, I promise you.
Man, that's beautiful. We are just several miles from Dayton, Ohio, and Roger Troutman had major influence over this area. Bootsy Collins, the Funk thing. That's East Coast funk right there, baby. So that's right in my backyard.
Yeah, shout out to Bootsy. We've been blessed, to work with him. One of the things, and I don't want to digress because your question was so excellent, but one of the things that's happened overseas sometimes gets it more than right here at home gets it in terms of crossing genres, all that kind of thing. So, we've been on stage, with Boots Hill and some of the people, Benjamin, overseas, where were we? At the North Sea Jazz Festival. It was, here we are, have remember in Holland, and it's like, and we're backstage, it's like, well, man, how come we ain't doing this at home? You
Right.
know, but they get it, you know.
Absolutely. No, we have a very dear friend in Carlton J. Smith. You may know Carlton. He has a residency in China. And
Wow, yeah.
he's called Soul Brother Number New. He does his James Brown review over there. And he tells me all the time, man, you got to get overseas. You got to get overseas because
Yep.
they understand funk. They understand soul.
Yes,
And
sir.
even a lot of the jazz groups, contemporary jazz groups, the first place they hit is the UK before they'll do a date in Seattle.
Yeah, how about that? Isn't
You
that
know what I mean?
something?
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm already there. Yeah.
But speaking in terms of travel and touring, we're talking about balance. What about the expense of taking a 10-piece orchestra plus your vocals and the mechanics of being on the road with that type of ensemble? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, what we have, and we needed to have, and that many ensembles like us also develop. We have a touring group, so that's a smaller number. So the touring group is 16, and that's still a lot of bodies to take on the
Sure.
road, but it's not 40 bodies. Okay.
Right. Right.
So when we go on the road, we have our 7 or 8 piece band, and then 8 or 9 vocals. So like usually 16 is our traveling number. But even logistically with that, you know, that it can be a challenge because people think of a band, they think in terms of 4 or 5 people, right?
Right. Right.
But when we go on the road, Brother Jere B, we are very self-contained. Everything from hair, makeup, wardrobe. I mean, everybody has a secondary job that they perform on the road. For example, I'm the music director and I play keyboards along with our assistant director, Brother Billy Steele. But my job on the road is road manager. So I call ahead and, check the hotel and the flights and all that kind of. So because if we didn't do that, then that would mean extra personnel that we, to bring along that we really can't afford to do, that we really need those bodies on stage performing.
Absolutely. Well, that's very good. That's the essence of being an EntreMusician because it's not just the music. It is the calling.
No,
it is
sir.
the following up.
It's funny you put it that way because Prince, rest his soul, used to always say, if it was only just the music.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of Prince, now, did your connection come through Jam and Lewis, or did you know him prior to Perspective Records, or what?
Actually, the latter, brother. That relationship, just like the Jam and Lewis relationship, goes back like 40 plus years, and not long after the Hines family, my family moved here to Minneapolis from Yonkers, New York. Prince and I went to the same junior high and high school. I was like 4 or 5 years ahead of him. But here's what happened. There's Bryant Junior High School here in Minneapolis. In fact, only about a mile or so from where I'm speaking to you at. And just a few blocks from Bryant Junior High School is was Central High School. They've torn it down and remodeled it, kind of thing. But the relevance of that is this. There was a lot of interaction, my brother, between the two schools, both especially their music and their academic, their athletic programs. And so I'll never forget my senior year at Central High School. I started hearing rumors about this dude down at Bryant Junior High School down the road who was a beast on every instrument. I mean, early, even back then, kind of thing.
Wow.
And of course, the rest is history. But over the years, we were blessed to perform, with Prince, again, just like with Jam and Lewis, at events like the Minneapolis Northside Festival, in the heart of the Northside Black community here, at the annual Miss Black Minnesota pageant or the annual Urban League dinner. So many times we were very, very, very familiar with each other, rehearsed, performed. And then when, just like Jam and Lewis, when Prince went on to international stardom, he never forgot about us. When he did the Batman soundtrack, he called in the Sounds of Blackness, and we did 2 of the songs on that. When he started the Love Sexy tour, kicked it off here in Minneapolis, we opened it up with him. So many, many projects together, but the friendship goes back, like I said, 40 plus years, and it's still painful and almost unrealistic to think, that he's not here.
Certainly. Now, so he obviously for stage purposes, for presentation, gave a certain persona. But, I mean, of course, Sheila E.'s book, Morris Day now has a book, they spoke a lot into his humanness. And I don't know, I know Jimmy Jam has a show. I don't think Jimmy has wrote a book yet, but can you speak to the humanness, the Prince that we didn't have so much access to?
Okay, absolutely. There's a few. First of all, the first thing I think that he would probably want me to say, the media, for whatever reason, my brother, tends to downplay how Afrocentric he was. Okay, when he wrote and recorded the song Baltimore and went there to the rally, after the brother was killed by the police. That's where his heart was. That wasn't about publicity or record sales or anything else. He's always been about that. In 1967, here in Minneapolis, when the riots broke out, he's been involved in the community, or was involved in the community like forever. So he's always been about the people. He would anonymously, we know now, send donations to places like some of the charter schools, the Urban League, the NAACP, just so many, the Seed Academy, so many things here. So he was always about that. So he loved all people. Let me be clear. We know he loved, but he had a special love for his people, and was really about the movement. That's number one. On the more personal side, he was another thing people may not know. He was a great athlete.
The basketball.
So, right. One of his favorite things. He was an all-city basketball player. Despite his height, which Minneapolis knows that, but a lot of people I know they saw the skit. With Dave. Right. They thought was that just comedy? Listen, no, he can really hoop. One of his favorite things to do. He had a brother. He had a hoop out at Paisley Park, and at Paisley. All the time, international actors and athletes, the jocks, the superstars would come through, just to check out the tour of Paisley. And sometimes, and so one of his favorite things to do, would be he'd bring out a basketball and say, "Hey, y'all want to go a little one-on-one?" And they'd laugh because they didn't know, kind of thing, So, but he would take them to the hole, So a real prankster, real hard for people. And he was another one that would pour out his soul just in terms of the personal side of him. Like I say, like Roger, he would call at 2 or 3 in the morning. Unlike now, Roger was very loud spoken. Prince was very soft spoken, but they both had in common. They would always say your full name. Gary Hines. I was thinking about this for Sounds of Blackness, Gary Hines. And but we would. There were 4 or 5 things we would always talk about when he would call. We would talk about God. We would talk about music, sports, and beautiful women. Not necessarily in that order.
In that order, right? Well, thank you for giving us a little bit more glimpse. It is a huge loss, not only to the music industry, but, songwriters and just his approach to production, his proficiency on everything that he picked up, just out of this world.
Incredible. Just absolute genius. Yeah.
Well, now let me ask a little bit more about you. We've talked about Sounds of Blackness. We've talked about the genres, the spirit of the band, the touring. Let me ask you about Gary Hines. You've already said that your mom was a singer. Now, did you come from a musical family? What is kind of the upbringing and the journey of Gary Hines?
Absolutely. So much of that, musical upbringing, of course, I owe to my mom, the late great Doris Hines. She performed with people like Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Della Reese, you name it, Duke Ellington, and she toured the world as well. So she was a great artist in her own right. But growing up in Yonkers, New York, there was all that music around us, and then in our neighborhood, Brother Jere, we were surrounded by music of so many ethnicities coming out of the windows on a hot summer night. So you would hear Greek and Jewish and Cuban and Jamaican, and then on the corner, guys singing doo-wop. All that was in. And what was on the jukebox? Yeah, I said jukebox. I'm going all the way back to the 60s. All that music. But my formal training, actually, originally, I'm a drummer. And so a shout out to the Samuel H. Dow American Legion Drum Corps, Yonkers, New York. Samuel H. Dow was the first black man to die in World War I from Yonkers, New York.
Wow.
And so they named this drum corps after him. And me and my brothers were in that drum corps. So brother Johnny Stewart, rest his soul, was trained me and my brothers in as drummers. And we were in that drum corps. So that's my music background, is as a drummer, and hearing all that that multi-ethnic music coming up. And then, of course, being surrounded by, in the household, my mom as she practiced her jazz. But then, of course, at Messiah Baptist in Yonkers, there was spirituals, gospel, and anthems. We used to sing them all in the church. Now.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you'd hear all three.
Wow. So what made you move full-time from drums to keyboards?
You know what? That's a great questions all across the board, by the way, my brother. I always had a fascination with the keyboard. Even just to look at it, it was like it was calling me. It just like looked inviting. It's like, just the keys, even as a drummer. And then, of course, as piano is actually a percussion instrument.
Correct.
And so I always had a fascination with it, and but didn't really start to act on that fascination until my sophomore year in high school. Basically self-taught, but I would immerse myself, and was blessed to be influenced by some master keyboardists, the late great Reverend Bill Perry, a native of Birmingham, Alabama, who was just a monstrous pianist, and was playing these huge jazz chords, in church, and that folks wasn't ready for. This was in the 60s. The stuff that we hear now, he was playing back then. I kid you not. And you talk about folks raised eyebrows and all that, but I came up hearing all of that and learning from him quite a bit.
Man, I know this goes back to the 80s, famous drummer turned pianist. His name is Barry Miles. You may know his music. I think he's back in New York. But, he was asked the same question, but he said for him, the drums were too limiting for what he was hearing in his head, and so he just became a master keeper. But that's his approach. I just moved from one percussion instrument to the other,
Yep. Yes, sir.
Now, I don't recall you singing, at least being a lead singer on any Sounds of Blackness albums. Is that by design or what?
That is definitely by design. My singers give me such a bad time. Singing is not my gift. I can hit a little bit of bass, vocal, but that's about it. But I teach them most of their parts, by singing them to them, audibly, kind of thing. And so they remind me all the time that I'm not a singer. But it's all good. Yeah.
So let's do a little rapid question and answer here. If you can sum up in one word these artists whom you work with that I'm going to give you, give me a one word perspective when I say Stevie Wonder.
Genius.
Quincy Jones.
Maestro.
Amazing. Michael Jackson.
Artist. True artist.
A little closer to home. Ann Nesby.
Oh my goodness. Extraordinary.
Very, very good. Around here, we call her Aretha Franklin Jr.
Yeah. Yes, she is. And speaking of Ann, and we remain close to this day and still do projects and so forth, even as she's embarked on her solo career for several years now. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, I know she would want me to send love to you, brother. And so a shout out to Ann and from Ann to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. A couple more. Elton John.
Elton John, brilliant.
Luther Vandross.
Oh my goodness. Luther. Wow, like I know I already said artist, consummate artist, entertainer,
Yeah.
Enter- yeah.
Yeah. One of the most fabulous shows that I've ever attended, and I've tried to attend as many as I could, but the most perfect show I've ever seen was a Luther Vandross presentation. Flawless.
Oh, bless you, brother. Yeah.
Nat Adderley Jr.
Yes.
directing, meticulously directing the band. I've never been to a show like that.
We were so blessed to tour with Luther for almost half a year in 1991, 92. And it was just absolutely amazing. In fact, it was the Power of Love tour with Lisa Fisher. Shout out to Lisa Fisher.
Yeah.
And the great Sinbad,
Oh, yeah.
open up kind of thing. And then Sounds of Blackness would open up with the music end, and then we would all do a big grand finale. And that was just one of the times of our lives. So, just all the love to the memory and legacy of the late, great Luther Vandross.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Miss him. Now, I'm sure you've worked with Marcus Miller, and Marcus were good friends and producer.
Your bass meister. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've done some things with Marcus. Been blessed to, of course, here stateside, but then also overseas as well. I think we did something with him as well. I think at the Notting Hill Festival, if I'm not mixing, but again, overseas, and you backstage and you're saying, man, this is great, but how come we ain't doing this at home? But they met. Oh, you know what it was? I think it was actually the Montreux in Switzerland.
Wow.
Jazz festival. Yeah. And it's like, man, this is awesome. We were backstage, and now check out this. They put together this grand finale. Brother Claude Nobbs, who's the producer of Montreux, Isaac Hayes, Olita Adams, Sounds of Blackness, and Little Richard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. It was, but see, they don't have that genre hang up. They just thinking like, oh man, how great would this be to have these artists together and do my just impromptu. I mean, this was literally put together like an hour before the night was about to end. And he says, would you guys come and do this? And I know we did a tribute to the Staples saying, would you guys do, I'll take you there. So sure, we can do that. So the band's getting it all together and all that. And so we did that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But you're right. There is no hang up on genres. I mean, 70s radio.
Right.
When we were growing up, I mean, you would listen to Parliament Funkadelic and then throw on Steely Dan, and then you throw on Fleetwood Mac, and then you would go to Cameo or BT Express. That's amazing. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. I really appreciate your time.
My honor, brother.
But here's a question, because you've seen the echelons, the higher echelons of the major labels, as well as being on independent labels yourself. And so can you guide the young EntreMusicians through points to look out for if you're being courted by a major label, or if you were being courted by the indie? What would be the best foundation to stand upon? Not them being themselves, but being business people to look out for. You need to pay attention to this. You need to regard that.
Absolutely. Great question, my brother. In terms of the major label side, just to make sure that you do have legal representation, and management, experienced management, that you communicate with them. Like our management, Ken Blackwelder management, Brent Harris is our manager. And he's out in LA and we're in Minneapolis, but we communicate every day, frequently more than once a day. Mm-hmm. So communication is key, and that everything is reviewed beforehand and discussed, even in rough draft form. Reduced to writing, troubleshoot it, and then before it's even a formal, whatever it is, whatever project it is or contract, before it's even a formal document, then you're conversing about it. You know all the different ins and outs of it before it's in its final form, for review. So to stay ahead of the game, and communication is key. And I would say that would also apply to the independent side as well. Probably not to as great a degree, but I think the same template would hold true.
Yes. Yes, that's excellent. Now, which season did you enjoy more? Because you've had success on both levels, but which season do you think you enjoyed more? The major label gives a little more distribution, of course, a little bit more radio, but I want you to share with us what you thought was the time where it was the best of both worlds for you.
Wow. I always try to answer everything that I'm asked, and I hear exactly what you're asking, but each one has had its, and I'm not just trying to be diplomatic here.
Sure.
Each one has had its strengths and weaknesses. Certainly on the major label side, with the distribution and with the access, and the soundtracks, all those other things, the sponsored tours. There's a level of gratification that comes with that. But then on the flip side, on the independent side, where those big dollars are not there, okay. But when you're able to break through to radio, to tour, to a soundtrack, whatever, and you've done it pretty much on your own, that's a whole nother level of satisfaction and gratification and appreciation. So
yes,
I hope you hear both sides.
I do.
That I'm getting.
I do. So now, how has streaming impacted, from where it was unit sales, downloads, and now it's just streaming? Has that had a major impact on the legacy of Sounds of Blackness?
Yes, and of course on really all artists, that have been in the situation situated as we are, where physical sales, were the foundation. At first, definitely a negative impact, because in terms of the buying audience. And the demographics in terms of who streams and who doesn't, and who's still wants to go to the record store, as Prince would say,
the record store,
But now, fortunately, it's coming back around where the streaming and the digital end can be and is being considered as a plus as opposed to a minus.
That's beautiful. Well, I certainly appreciate that. Now, let me ask you this final question. Well, before I do, let me say this. You and I first hooked up with an email. You were gracious enough to allow us the opportunity to forward a license of Everything's Gonna Be All Right by the great guitarist Eric Tyus down in South Carolina. And I want you to know that in 2020, we will be moving on that radio campaign. You wrote an excellent song. So thank you for allowing us the opportunity to do that.
My honor, brother.
Well, it's absolutely our honor. And I'll just say this, and Eric would want me to say this because his wife was passing away during that time of this recording. And so we utilized her voice and her part of saying, everything's going to be all right. That's one of the hooks that we use that sample her voice. So in honor of Gene Tyus, who has now transitioned. But my final question to you, my friend, is what was the question you wanted me to ask you? You were anticipating me to ask you, and I did not. Would you answer that unasked question?
Okay. Let's see. And you're so thorough and professional in your presentation, brother, that you put me on the spot. Let's see. I would maybe say what Sounds of Blackness' current focus is. And the answer to that would be our current single with Jam and Lewis called Till I Found You, featuring, of course, none other than Ann Nesby and the late, great Big Jim Wright.
Yes, Big Jim.
Yes, just so shout out to the memory of Big Jim.
Yes.
But yes, so that we are so blessed, brother, because Sounds of Blackness is because that single is the first single released from the forthcoming Jam and Lewis compilation CD called Jam and Lewis Volume 1, which is going to have recordings from all the different artists they work with. I mean, everything, Babyface, Mariah Carey, Jennifer Hudson, Earth, Wind & Fire, I mean, Boys to Men. We're on there, and Sounds of Blackness is the first release. So even to be a part of that is an honor and a blessing. But to be the first is just really, I don't know, a tribute to us, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. To be the first artist that they signed, and then when the compilation comes out, to be the first single from that is a huge tribute to you. And you deserve it. And listen, let me tell you something. My nose is brown enough. I don't have to say anything I don't mean. I can tell you there were times that the Sounds of Blackness music, the lyrics, the content, the presentation brought me and those that I've worked with and those in my family through some terrible times. When you say, you know what, everything's going to be all right. When you say, I believe, you know, when you say, no matter what it takes, I'm going to make it. I'm going all the way. These are anthems. They get in your spirit. So thank you for writing music that remains. Your music is not just locked in the 90s, brother. It's not. It lives today and it will live tomorrow. So God bless you, man. And thank you for allowing Holy Spirit to use you in such a way where your impact is worldwide.
Oh, bless you, brother. I just give all glory and praise and thanks to God, you know, who makes it all possible. I ain't got a whole lot of sense, but I got enough to know that.
Amen. Amen. Well, I appreciate you. I hope those of you who are watching and listening could hear the depth of spirit in this brother's voice. I'm telling you, if you don't know anything about Sounds of Blackness, you definitely have a history. You can go back on YouTube. You can go on Spotify. You can get their music and let it marinate in your spirit like it has in mine. This is the great Gary D. Hines, producer, writer, arranger, EntreMusician of the eminent Sounds of Blackness. God bless him for his experience. Thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you, and God bless you, my brother.
Thank you. My name is Jere B. That's Gary Hines. We are EntreMusicians, and so are you. We will definitely see you next time. Peace.
Peace.